Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of our podcast series. My name is Margot, and I am a marketing manager at Hyperlex, a startup which tries and provides company with a contract management solution that helps to structure, simplify, and accelerate contract processes. And today I'm happy to interview Craig Conte, an expert in contract management. Hello, Craig. Thank you so much for accepting this interview. How are you today?
No, great to be here, Margot. And thanks so much for having me. And thanks everyone out there on the internet. It's a good topic, and so happy to be part of this again. And happy to be speaking to your French audience as well. So, bonjour. And I apologize for muttering the language already.
That's great. Before we start, a few words about your background. You're a partner at Deloitte, responsible for its contract legal management consulting team, and you have been working in contracting, contract management, and tech enablement for over 20 years. That's impressive.
I started when I was 10.
It seems like then. Your team focuses on optimizing the end-to-end contracting and then post-signature contract and commercial management processes for companies. You do this with a focus on business outcomes, lowering the cost of contracting and increasing the speed and efficiency of each process. Thus, you're one of the most qualified people to talk about CLM implementations. And today we will talk in particular about why they fail, and I will refer to an article that you wrote that's called Why CLM Implementation Fails, because so much can be learned from failures. So I guess my first question for you would be, what failures are we talking about here?
Oh, sure. No, thanks. And thanks for the very warm introduction. So I think, CLM, your contract lifecycle management is a complicated technology out there, but it's still relatively new in the grand scheme of things. People have been doing pieces of this for 20 something years, I guess I would say, but really the last 5 years has it really taken off, and I think gone to sort of an enterprise level. And I think people try to buy it just off the shelf and say, okay, great, technology will solve everything for me, right? I have this phone, it's going to solve all my communication. I have this car, it'll solve my transportation. But people forget that, a phone by itself doesn't really do anything without people. A car by itself doesn't really do anything besides sit there. I know they're trying to make driverless cars, but you need to have someone to go. So I think people sometimes think like, okay, great, contracting is complicated. I need some technology, but they don't really think about what it is that they're trying to solve. And contracting and the whole contract lifecycle management is a complicated space. There's contract generation, there's a signature, there's the management of a contract, there's the end of a contract. So what really is the problem you're trying to solve? And there's different technologies really that focus on different aspects of it. Are you trying to be more efficient? Are you trying to get to closing the deal faster because that gets you more money? Are you losing money on the back end because no one knows what's happening? Here, particularly in Europe, there's lots of regulations that if you don't adhere to them, the EU will get you. Also, the UK will get you. That will fine you, heavily, if you don't necessarily adhere to the regulations in your contract. So, it's important that I think people understand, what they're trying to buy. People understand that it's not just technology, but the people who do it, and also understand that's the process that connects the two. And oftentimes people just look at one thing and say, haha, the technology will solve everything. I've yet to see that happen pretty much in any industry.
Okay, but then 2020 rhymes with the acceleration of digitization of companies and remote work, and technology seems to be a great answer to the need for companies to keep doing business. And I think the crisis really highlighted the particular and essential role of technology. But like, yeah, as you say, tech is not enough, and maybe companies need to do little things before buying the tech, like maybe reorganizing the way they work and things like this.
No, exactly. I mean, so look, I mean, you're exactly right. 2020 was an, a complicated year. It's one that we'll never forget, I think, ever. But I mean, and it hastened the world. Let's look at us right now. Normally, in a world, we'd be doing this, in a studio or someplace together,
That
having
would
this,
have been nice.
but at least we wore the red shirts together. So we're matching it that way. But, just think of now, like you have, whether it's, different programs that we have for calls every day to do things. The technology solved our way to connect, right? But then also create another problem that we connect almost too much, because if you're just using the
Mm,
technology for it, suddenly your day gets chopped up into 30-minute increments. It takes the idea though of process and understanding that, well, actually mental health and actually efficiency, let's maybe it'll make these 15-minute meetings. Maybe we can make these 20-minute meetings or 45-minute meetings to give time around. So the technology, you're right, has forced us. I mean, I guess the circumstances have forced us to adopt technology more. Great, and that's good. Particularly in contract management, whereas before, I could walk down the hall, get someone to look at my contract, or I could walk down the hall and get someone to sign it. Now that there's all sorts of e-signature solutions, and there have been, but people start adopting them a lot more now. People start realizing I don't need to
mhm.
walk down the hall to talk to my lawyer. I can talk to my lawyer or commercial person this way. And you know what? I can actually, even if they give me enough information, I can assemble a contract myself. So this is really, it's forced us to, adopt things and really, grow better, because humans are good at, change. But it's also, we have to, take a step back and say, well, just putting too much technology or just throwing it all by itself doesn't get the results we want. We have to think back and take a step and say, am I trying to be more efficient? And actually taking a contract that was, just pages and pages long, and putting it into the best technology in the world. If you're trying to digitize it, why don't we try to not just digitize it, but optimize it? Let's make the contract, more, user friendly. I think a lot of people have started to realize that now, negotiating, you can negotiate online, it's fine. But, we have positions that, if I'm at 10 and you're at 1, and we know we're going to get to 5 at some point, why don't
Mm.
we start at 4 and 6, as opposed to incrementally negotiating this all? We want more time to not be on the computer, to be outside. I think hopefully we're all outside more soon. We want that time. Let's use technology in the most efficient way, not just use it all the time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And about how you work, so you and your team help companies to transform their contract and commercial management functions and activities to drive efficiency, create better value, as you were saying, but also smoothly work across all teams that are involved in the contracting process. How can you measure this, and why is obligation management so important today?
Sure. Well, I mean, contracting is a team sport. I think, lawyers are involved, but procurement, sales, finance, the operations, everyone sort of touches contracts, but no one owns it completely. So what we
Mm.
try to do, I think, others do as well. I think, technologies try to do this too, is realize that contracting has to go. It's one of those few things that goes across an organization completely. So rather than just looking and saying, oh, your legal team needs a change, or, your procurement team needs a change, let's look at the process that goes across everyone, see the touch points, and see what can be changed there. And actually, where can we eliminate touch points?
Mm.
How can we do this better? That, well, look, lawyers are tremendous, great minds, good people, smart people, but do we need them for everything? Do we need do we need a lawyer for an NDA? Do we need a lawyer for a simple agreement that has been done 100 times this month by your company before? Could any person who could read with the right rules and understanding do it themselves? Could a robot do it? Probably. Let's see if we can find those opportunities that we can eliminate these things at all. And your second question, why is, obligation management, so important? I always compare this, to marriage, right? Or dating, or signing a contract, picking a partner. to do a bit of work with is the fun part. You get to go on dates, you go on trips,
Yes, it
have
is.
all that fun, maybe a little bit of wine, right? That's the fun part, right? Let's get to that piece. But then after it's done, that's when the work starts, when you move in together, right? And if you don't necessarily, if you just sort of, give up on it and don't put the work in there, the relationship falls apart. I don't care, how much you were in love before. If you don't put the work in later on, the relationship's going to fall apart. Now it can fall apart. I'll stretch the metaphor, right? Money will be lost, right?
Mhm.
People their expectations will be missed. This just same thing with customers and vendors, right? If you don't understand the obligations and expectations of your partner, right, and don't fulfill those, someone's going to be disappointed, and then eventually you'll split, which no one wants in a contract anyway. So I think it's very important that now it's a little more complicated than just that, but there's all sorts of things. We have it. Contract is a set of expectations of how we're going to have manage our relationship together. And if you don't take that seriously, it's just bound to cause either problems or loss of money or tears or something.
Okay, really interesting. You say in your article that companies should surround themselves with the right people. What does the best team for you mean? Sorry. What does the best team look like for you? Is it a company with an external consultant and an IT provider, for example? How does it work?
Well, I'm naturally biased. I think that consultants are great people. I think though it's important that if you're implementing a technology, you need to have a good IT vendor that's going to be straight with you. But remember, the IT vendor is selling you IT. Fundamentally, you're either selling you know technology or you're selling services. So the IT vendor probably has the best technology there could be. They can explain it themselves, et cetera, what the technology does, but they're not services. So you have to then usually partner with someone, out there to help them implement it, or you yourself have to have a team that is involved. No matter what, you have to have, your company has to have, involved in this because it's a change in the way you're doing it, and you're not going to have the consultants or the technology provider there the whole time. So you have to have stakeholders, you have to have champions who understand, what's happening here and can exist on their own after the IT company has implemented, after the consultants have done their work. You have to have a group of people who really understand what's going on here that can help others go throughout the way. So I think it's sort of a three-legged stool is sometimes a comment you hear that you need the IT, the services, and your internal. There's all ways of looking at it, but that's really the key part. And what I would say too, from the company perspective, don't look at this as just an IT implementation of a technology because IT is great. They're probably great technicians with inside your company as well, who may have done 50 or sorry, more like 5 ERP implementations or buy something different. Contracting is complicated. And it's because it touches lawyers, it touches finance people, it touches procurement, all these different industries. I have yet to meet the IT professional who understands all those intimately. So you need to have different,
Mhm.
different people within their stakeholders or whoever who person from procurement to be the voice of that, the person from legal to be a voice of that, the person from sales to be the voice of the customer, however this is going to be, how the contract's going to be used. Because I think all those challenges together, turn into the right answer. Just doing it, I think anything in contracting, if you do it by yourself, if you do it right, it's probably more luck than anything. If you do it together, it's probably more likely
Yeah,
to be successful.
and luck is not a strategy,
Luck is never a strategy.
as you say. Okay, you have practiced outsourcing and IT transactional law in New York. Could you tell us about differences of maturity between the US and UK and the European market?
That's an interesting question. I think, it just sort of depends. But I think U.S. probably has done, you know, probably is more outsourcing and UK outsourcing friendly. Some of that just is just the culture of it, that there's early adoption of going to places like India, you know, uh, Central Europe, etc. That's just more of a common thing. I think the sophistication that you'll see in the continent, whether it's France or Germany or etc., right? You know, very complicated, sophisticated businesses and buyers is just not as common. And I think some of that has to do with the
Mhm.
fact that English to some extent is the language of business. Sorry about that.
It is.
It just
It's okay.
there's a certain commonality to that, so that way it's probably easier. I mean, you know, there's more places where you can find English speaking and and familiarity with those. Although you're seeing more outsourcing across Europe because civil law. There's a
Mhm.
commonality in the civil law codes, right? In the Nordic countries, or particularly the Benelux, and then Germany and Poland, etc., have a lot of things very similar. That then countries such as Poland or Czech Republic, etc., that have the DNA of that makes sense, because at least they're seeing the same kind of contract structure
Mhm.
of that. So I think it's just the sophistication. I mean, every country I think is incredibly sophisticated in terms of this. I did a deal in South America for 16 countries to outsource, and I can tell you that Argentina
Wow.
and Chile were very sophisticated buyers, and how they were outsourcing their work. It's just not as common, just because you don't hear about it as much. Maybe because Americans are louder. I don't know. But it's I think it's just it'll get there. I think in terms of it, some of it also too is labor law. Just to be honest, right? It's more complicated.
Mhm.
In some of the countries, in terms of outsourcing the steps to do it versus in the U.S., where labor law is different than perhaps other countries which are
Mhm.
more probably protective of employees. So that's just the nature of the business out there.
Okay. And within Europe, do you see sort of differences in between the countries about maturity of the market?
Yeah, I mean, so from a contract management standpoint, I mean, I think you see, I mean, so France, I mean, has schools, I mean, that do this. I mean, I think you can actually get a degree, in contract management. There's some private organizations that do
Yes,
this as well.
we have two
Uh,
schools, I think, in France for that.
Yes. Yeah, so I think maybe U.S. and UK were slightly ahead, but I mean France is taking this seriously. You see the more development of that skill set, and you see that development of that structure within organizations. I think Nordic countries have always sort of had very strong sort of commercial and procurement focused and contract management there. So I mean, I think every country is sort of coming at it from a different angle. How they sort of build
Mhm.
this themselves. um, I think I think the good thing is that what's it the the early bird catches the worm, but the second bird doesn't get caught, right, or something like that. But like you get to sort of learn the
Yes,
lessons
you
coming
mean.
through, of coming in quickly, that say, look, hey, maybe this wasn't there 20 years ago or 10 years ago, but now you can these countries that have sophisticated companies, smart people, etc., can look at examples of, okay, I get that, this works for me here and this works for me there, because it's still a people business, and the way contracts are considered, the way
Mhm.
sort of, the value is put into the contract, the repercussions of it, the regulatory aspects of it. I think just like the fact that we're doing this is something that 5 years ago
Mm.
you didn't see much of in France. I used to work for a French company for a long time, and there was talks about this, and we took it internally, but you didn't see that necessarily in the French market as much necessarily noise until the last few years. That there's been lots of companies such as yourself. And it's wonderful to see the startups. I mean, you see companies getting investments around all sorts of countries. It used to be just West Coast US would get investment, but now you see companies all across
Hmm.
Europe, getting private equity funds. So I mean, I think it's going to catch up very quickly.
Okay, well, I remember what you just said and try make it happen quicker. Well, you were talking about how in the US and the UK there is a sort of habit of outsourcing, but do you think in France, for example, we can learn from these markets and maybe I mean look up to them and think, well, we can do this, so we can accelerate this process that you were talking about?
Well, yeah, I think so. So I mean, I think you see some companies doing this, right? That look, if contract management's a new thing, right? Or newer, rather than perhaps, sometimes it's easier to build new than it is to renovate.
Mm-hmm.
With housing. So you see sometimes companies that are going to say, well, look, I need to build a contract management function. I could take people in my own country and do this, or I could place this somewhere else. I could go to a company that's an expert in this, that has done this before for me, to make it faster for me to get there. And they can sort of be, it's sometimes easier, to go, because
Mm-hmm.
it takes to find the right contract management professional that could be out there, right? You have to sort of be looking at the market, and depending upon what's available in the local jurisdiction, et cetera, there may not be as many as you like. So you're seeing some companies in across Europe and France too, like look and say, well, I could try to build this myself with one or two here, or I could go over, this is a new thing within my company anyway. Why don't I go to company X and they can help build it for me? So I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a sort of outsourcing you're seeing. So it's not necessarily the 1990s outsourcing of, we're going to take this job over here and move it over there. I think it's more a sophisticated level of outsourcing, saying, well, look, I as an organization need to do X, Y, Z, which I'm doing right well. Now I need to do A, B, C as well. Do I want to, maybe I'll build A and I outsource B and C.
Okay, it's very clear. Thank you. And here is my last question for you. How do you think the CLM market will evolve in the next few years?
I think it's just going to keep growing. I think there's I say this every year. I think that it keeps getting bigger and bigger. I think you'll see. There's 250 tools or so out there, which is a lot of technologies. Some have been around for a while, some have not. I think it's a very interesting, this third wave, you might call it, of technologies that have been built in the last 5 years, that I think are very interesting, that come from a different model of hey, it's just like looking at phones, right? Think of like smartphone version 1.0 versus smartphone X or whatever they have today. It's coming from a different place, that and how users interact with it, etc. So I think you're going to see some consolidation. You'll see some probably bigger players out there buy things. I think it's just going to keep growing out there. I think it becomes more ubiquitous. I think companies now realizing that they can't just work off of pen and paper. This now is
Mm.
how it works, right? It's somewhere. What the old saying is, 1900s, people try to figure out how to make the horse faster, or you build a car. You know, I think now we've established that faster horses aren't going to work. You need a car, and I think that's where CLM is right now. Is that building it yourself, not necessarily the answer. It's a mature enough market out there that people need some help out there, and I think there's good options for everyone.
Great. Well, that's a wrap, as we say. Thank you so much for your time, Craig. And I invite all the people that are watching or listening to this video to read your articles.
Oh, thank you so much, Margot. I really appreciate it, and thanks for your time. Hopefully, next time we do this in Paris somewhere.
Yeah, that with pleasure.